Sheriff Jack Rourke had always valued his independence as the sheriff of a quiet Redwood County. He had spent years upholding the law, ensuring that people's rights were protected and keeping order where it was needed. But when he was off duty, his home was his sanctuary, his private retreat from the world. His property sat on several acres of land just outside the boundaries of a gated community that was governed by an infamously strict homeowners association, HOA. Jack had deliberately chosen this location to avoid the very thing that many of his neighbors had to endure: endless rules, arbitrary fines, and a group of overzealous board members dictating how they should live. His land was his, untouched by the HOA, free from their interference, or so he had thought. The first letter arrived on a Monday. Jack had just come home from a long shift, kicked off his boots, and was pouring himself a well-earned drink when he noticed the official-looking envelope sitting on his kitchen counter. The return address bore the name Clearwater Pines HOA, the very same association that controlled the neighborhood adjacent to his property. Frowning, he tore it open, expecting it to be a mistake. But as he scanned the words, his eyes narrowed. "Dear Mr. Rourke," it read, "it has come to our attention that your property falls within the expanded jurisdiction of Clearwater Pines HOA. As such, you are required to comply with community regulations, including but not limited to prohibited fencing styles, Section 5.3, unapproved exterior structures, Section 8.2, unauthorized vehicle storage, Section 11.1, and landscaping compliance requirements, Section 4.7. You are hereby instructed to correct these violations within 30 days or face escalating fines. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Please submit your compliance plan to the HOA board by the end of the month." Jack let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Jurisdiction? There was no way in hell his land had suddenly become part of their HOA. He had made sure of that when he bought the place years ago. This had to be some kind of clerical error. Tossing the letter onto the table, he dismissed it entirely. But the HOA didn't stop there. A few days later, he noticed a black SUV parked near his property line. Inside, two people sat with clipboards, occasionally stepping out to take pictures of his fence, his truck, even his barn. Jack stepped outside, making his way toward them, but as soon as they saw him, the SUV peeled away. He told himself it was just a coincidence, but when another HOA letter arrived that evening, this time with a fine attached, he started to feel the first flicker of real irritation. Then came the complaints. Neighbors he barely knew started looking at him differently. A man walking his dog muttered something about troublemakers who don't respect the rules. A woman across the road glared at his pickup truck parked in the driveway, shaking her head. It wasn't long before Jack heard from an old friend, a retired deputy who lived nearby, warning him that the HOA was rallying people against him. Apparently, their new president, some woman named Eleanor Davis, had taken it upon herself to clean up the neighborhood, and Jack was at the top of her list. Still, he wasn't worried. He knew the law, and he knew his rights. If they wanted to harass him with empty threats, let them try. He wasn't part of their HOA. But what he didn't realize was that this wasn't just about letters and fines. This was a coordinated attack, one that was only just beginning. The pressure started subtly at first, little things that Jack could have ignored if he were the type to ignore threats. The second letter arrived just 3 days after the first, but this one wasn't just a warning. It contained a fine, $500 for failure to comply with HOA regulations. Attached was a photo of his own property, taken without his knowledge. His truck parked in the driveway was circled in red ink. The fence he had built himself years ago was marked with an annotation, non-compliant structure. Jack wasn't a man to lose his temper over paperwork, but the fact that someone had trespassed onto his land to take these pictures set his blood boiling. That evening, he installed additional security cameras around his property. If the HOA wanted to play games, fine, but he wasn't going to be caught off guard. Then came the inspectors. One afternoon, as Jack worked on his truck, he noticed two men in khakis and polo shirts standing near his front gate, clipboards in hand. They were openly writing things down, pointing at different areas of his yard, his house, his barn. Jack wiped the grease off his hands and approached. "Help you with something?" One of the men, a weasel-looking guy with a smug smile, barely glanced at him before answering, "Routine compliance check. HOA regulations." Jack folded his arms. "Not a member of your HOA." The man chuckled as if Jack had said something amusing. "That's what a lot of people think, but according to our updated property maps, your land is now within Clearwater Pines jurisdiction." Jack took another step closer, lowering his voice. "That map is wrong, and unless you have a warrant or legal authority, you're trespassing." The man's smile faltered. His partner nudged him, muttering something, and within seconds they turned and walked off. But they had already made their statement. They weren't asking Jack to comply, they were demanding it. Then the real harassment began. Late at night, his motion sensors started going off repeatedly, but whenever he checked, there was no one there. He would wake up to find his garbage cans knocked over, his mailbox stuffed with printed copies of HOA regulations. One morning, he found an official-looking notice taped to his door stating that his home was now on a watch list for ongoing violations. The final straw came when he caught a group of men in his backyard taking more pictures. Jack stepped onto his porch, his hand resting near his holster. "You got 5 seconds to explain what the hell you're doing before I call the real cops." One of them, wearing a jacket with HOA enforcement written on the back, didn't even flinch. "Sir, this is a compliance review. Please step aside while we document the violations." Jack narrowed his eyes. "That a badge on your belt?" The man smirked. "We're authorized security for the HOA." That's when Jack knew this had escalated into something bigger than a property dispute. These people weren't just issuing fines, they were building a case, and they weren't planning on stopping until they forced him to submit. It was one thing for the HOA to send letters and fines. It was another for them to trespass on his land and harass him with bogus inspections. But when Jack saw a group of men in police-style uniforms approaching his front gate, he realized the game had changed. These weren't just overzealous HOA board members anymore. They were playing pretend cops. The first thing that caught Jack's eye was the badges, cheap knockoffs pinned to navy blue shirts with HOA Community Police embroidered across the chest. The men moved with forced authority, chests puffed out, hands resting near their belts where cheap plastic holsters held fake-looking batons. They weren't carrying firearms, but that didn't make them any less dangerous. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and sunglasses, stepped forward. "Mr. Rourke, we need to speak with you regarding multiple unresolved violations." His tone was a little too official, like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Jack stayed where he was, arms crossed over his chest. "Last I checked, HOA fines don't come with a SWAT team." The man smirked. "Sir, we're part of a newly authorized HOA enforcement unit. You've ignored multiple compliance notices. We've been given authority to stop right there." Jack's voice dropped an octave, all humor gone. He took a single step forward, just enough to remind them he wasn't the kind of man you intimidated. "Authority from who?" The guy hesitated. "The HOA board has granted us," Jack laughed. "The HOA doesn't have law enforcement power. You boys are cosplaying. I should arrest you for impersonating officers." That hit a nerve. The men exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado flickering for a moment before Buzzcut regained his composure. He pulled a folded document from his pocket and thrust it toward Jack. "This is an official HOA-issued citation. Failure to comply means further action will be taken." Jack took the paper, skimmed it, then ripped it in half right in front of them. "Get the hell off my land." Buzzcut's jaw clenched, his face flushing red. "You're making a mistake, sir." "No," Jack said coolly. "You are. And if I catch any of you on my property again, I'll show you what a real arrest looks like." The fake cops stood their ground for a moment longer, but they could feel the shift. They weren't intimidating him. Jack wasn't bluffing. Without another word, they turned and walked back toward their SUVs. But before getting in, Buzzcut made a call on his radio. Jack watched them drive away, his gut telling him this wasn't over. The HOA wasn't just sending threats anymore. They were testing how far they could push him, and he had a feeling they were about to push a lot harder. Jack didn't believe in coincidences. The sudden appearance of HOA enforcers in fake uniforms, the growing hostility from neighbors, the trespassers photographing his land, it all pointed to something bigger. The HOA wasn't just trying to bully him into compliance. They were escalating towards something more organized, more dangerous. That night, he sat at his desk, reviewing the footage from his security cameras. What he saw made his stomach tighten. The fake cops hadn't just stopped by for a visit. They had circled his property multiple times, peering through windows, testing the gate, even trying the barn door. That wasn't a compliance check. That was a tactical assessment. Jack knew he needed information, and he knew exactly where to get it. The next morning, he made a call to Deputy Kevin Jennings, one of his men at the sheriff's office, a guy with a reputation for digging up dirt where it needed to be found. Within hours, Kevin sent him a link to an internal HOA document, one that shouldn't have been public. As Jack read through it, his expression darkened. The HOA had created an official community enforcement division, complete with a budget for hiring private security. According to the document, the team had been given limited authority to issue citations, detain individuals for neighborhood safety concerns, and conduct patrols on all affiliated properties, a deliberately vague term. But the worst part, the security force was being trained by an ex-cop named Victor Martel. Jack recognized the name immediately. Martel was a disgraced former officer, kicked off the force for excessive force violations and misconduct. Now, the HOA had hired him to train a bunch of wannabe cops to enforce rules that had no legal standing. Digging deeper, Jack found financial records showing that Martel had been funneling HOA funds into his own security firm, paying himself inflated salaries for consulting work that wasn't just overreach, that was fraud. The HOA wasn't just harassing homeowners, they were running a racket. Jack leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just about him anymore. The entire neighborhood was under siege. If he didn't stop it now, these fake enforcers would get bolder, more aggressive. Someone would get hurt. And if the HOA wanted to play dirty, they had no idea who they were up against. It was time to go on the offensive. Jack had spent years dealing with criminals, liars, and power-hungry opportunists, but Eleanor Davis was something else. She wasn't just trying to enforce some overreaching HOA rules. She was running an operation, and now that he had exposed it, she was shifting into full-blown retaliation. The first shot came the next morning when Jack woke up to find his power and water shut off. At first, he thought it was a technical issue until he called the utility company and got the response, "Sir, your service was disconnected due to a zoning violation complaint filed by your homeowners association." Jack nearly laughed at the absurdity. He wasn't even part of the HOA, but Clearwater Pines had filed a fraudulent report claiming he had illegal modifications on his property, triggering an automatic utility shutdown. It would take weeks to untangle the mess with the city. Before Jack could even process that, his phone buzzed with a text from Kevin at the sheriff's office. "Boss, you're on the front page. They're coming at you hard." Pulling up the local news, Jack's jaw clenched. There it was, sheriff under investigation for violating HOA laws, threatening community safety. The article, clearly fed to the press by the HOA, painted Jack as a reckless outsider refusing to comply with community standards. It claimed he had been verbally aggressive with HOA enforcers and that neighbors had filed multiple complaints about disturbances on his property. It was a complete fabrication, but the HOA was shifting the battlefield. They were turning the town against him, making him look like the problem. Then came the final move, the formal legal notice taped to his front door. You are hereby instructed to vacate the premises within 30 days due to persistent noncompliance with HOA regulations and failure to meet community safety standards. They were trying to evict him from his own land. Jack didn't get angry. He got cold. Eleanor had made a mistake, a big one. She had declared war on the wrong man. If she wanted to play dirty, she was about to find out what happens when you pick a fight with the law itself. Jack had dealt with criminals, con artists, and power-hungry officials in his time as sheriff, but he had never seen anything this brazen. The HOA wasn't just fining him, slandering him, or trying to cut him off from basic utilities. They were about to cross a legal line they couldn't walk back from. It started just after sundown. Jack was sitting on his porch, watching the last of the sunlight fade behind the trees, when the sound of approaching vehicles shattered the silence. He knew trouble when he heard it. 3 black SUVs pulled up to his property, headlights cutting through the dark like spotlights. From the vehicles emerged a full team of fake HOA cops, 6 men in matching Navy uniforms, black tactical vests, and plastic badges pinned to their chests. But this time, they weren't just playing pretend. They carried batons, zip ties, and stun guns holstered on their belts. Their leader, Buzzcut, the same guy who had tried to intimidate Jack days ago, stepped forward, holding up a laminated document like it was a golden ticket. Thomas Rourke, you are under arrest for repeated violations of community law and failure to comply with lawful HOA directives. Jack didn't move. He barely even blinked. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching them with the same calm detachment he used on belligerent drunks in lockup. Community law? Jack repeated, his voice even. Hate to break it to you, son, but the HOA doesn't write the law. Buzzcut smirked. Actually, sir, under Clearwater Pines HOA's emergency ordinance, failure to comply with our authority allows us to detain you until an official review can be conducted. Jack exhaled slowly. You just said detain. You realize that means you're impersonating real law enforcement, right? That's a felony. A flicker of hesitation crossed Buzzcut's face, but he didn't back down. You're in violation of multiple regulations. Jack cut him off. Tell me something. Who issued that arrest warrant you're holding? Buzzcut glanced at the document. The HOA Judicial Committee. Jack chuckled. The HOA doesn't have a judicial committee. For the first time, the fake cops looked uncertain, but Buzzcut wasn't backing down. He motioned to his men. Secure the suspect. That was their second mistake. Jack's voice dropped to a deadly calm. Try it, and I swear to God, you'll be in real handcuffs before the night's over. But the men hesitated too long. The sound of sirens split the night air. The SUV's headlights caught the reflection of 3 real police cruisers pulling onto Jack's land, red and blue lights flashing. The HOA cops turned in alarm as uniformed deputies, Jack's deputies, piled out, hands resting on their service weapons. Deputy Kevin Jennings, his second in command, stepped forward, flashing a real badge. Evening, fellas. Mind telling me what the hell you think you're doing? Buzzcut stammered. This is an HOA matter. Kevin tilted his head. Funny, 'cause it looks a lot like felony false imprisonment, impersonating law enforcement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. He nodded toward the fake warrant. That document's void. The authority you think you have? Non-existent. Jack finally stood, his calm expression never wavering. See, the thing about arresting a sheriff on his own land? You better be real damn sure you're allowed to do it. Kevin grinned. Oh, and in case you were wondering, we got the whole thing on tape. The realization hit the fake cops like a freight train. They had walked right into a trap, and now it was their turn to be arrested. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, city officials, and homeowners from Clearwater Pines all gathered to witness the downfall of the most corrupt HOA in town's history. At the center of it all sat Eleanor Davis, her perfectly ironed blazer, doing little to hide the stress written across her face. Across the room, Sheriff Jack Rourke sat in the witness stand, calm as ever, a man who had already won before the trial had even started. The charges against Eleanor and her fake HOA police force were staggering: impersonating law enforcement, fraud, conspiracy, attempted false imprisonment, illegal surveillance, harassment. The list went on. But the most damning piece of evidence was the fake arrest attempt, caught on Jack's security cameras, showing HOA enforcers trying to illegally detain a sitting sheriff. As the trial began, the prosecution wasted no time tearing apart Eleanor's scheme. They presented financial records showing that Eleanor had siphoned thousands of dollars from HOA fees to fund her illegal security force. She had hired disgraced ex-cop Victor Martel to train a